Thank you, everyone, and good morning. Yes, and welcome to this second panel discussion. As you mentioned, this will be dedicated to those success factors for special economic zones able to generate growth and encourage regional integration. As mentioned, my name is Jacopo De Toni, and I am the editor of FDI Intelligence, the foreign investment monitor of the Financial Times in London, and also the publisher of our flagship Global Free Zones Awards. So first of all, great honor. Let me thank you, Ahmed, and the African Economic Zone Organization for having me here. The rise and development of African economic zones is a topic that I'm really passionate about. And I'm really looking forward to this, to discussing it with Mr. Ahmed Benis and Mr. Richard Baldwin, that I know will be presenting a survey with us that will shed light on the expectations of zones across the continent ahead of the introduction of the African Continental Free Trade Area. As you know, COVID-19 has triggered a big slowdown in global investment, and competition is really heating up. And this is why functioning free zones will be really vital instruments for African countries, as well countries all over the world, to attract investment in this very challenging market environment, and in a specific case of Africa, also promote integration in the context of the mentioned African continental free trade area. But without further ado, the two panelists have already been presented. Ahmed Benis, the Secretary General of our host AEZO, and Richard Baldwin, the Director of Investment Research at the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, or UNCTAD. Ahmed, I know that you have some introductory remarks. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Jacopo. First of all, I wanted to congratulate the team who worked hardly on this survey and make this project happen. So we've started discussing together with the United Nations Conference for Trade and Development the issues that are related to the development of the special economic zones across the continent. And we've decided early this year to conduct a dedicated survey that would be based on good practices within the SEZ and the sentiments towards the impact of the forthcoming implementation of the CFTA agreements, and also the challenges that the African special economic zones would be facing. So we have started sharing the survey itself with the different members of our organizations, and we received 39 response from the individual SEZ and SEZ authorities, investment promotion agencies, representing 30 African countries. And I also take this opportunity to thank again all the respondents for the time and data they provided, because such engagements from the zones only increases and confirms their potential to grow together hand in hand. So the survey itself covered a number of management and development practices within the SEZ, as well as several indicators on the performance of the zones, including the business models, transport infrastructures, social, environmental practices, and others. And the survey addressed also the current trade situation within the SEZ and pattern expected after the forthcoming implementation of this continental free trade agreement with African and non-African countries. So investment patterns were also one of the main focuses of the survey, tackling FDI trends with a focus on current status and the post-CFTA expectations. So to summarize, the study concentrated on the implementation of the continental free trade agreements, the opportunity that does it offer, the challenges that it brings to be added to the one that we are currently faced within the SEZ communities, including the barriers to intra-African trade and to attract FDI, and of course, not to mention the global pandemic and the COVID-19 recovery that has been shaken the global economic environment. I, I think Richard is also connected with us, and he will be sharing the conclusions, the main conclusions, and the outcome of this study. Richard, can you hear us?
Yes, I hear you, Ahmed.
All right. Good morning, Richard.
Good morning, and thank you very much for the nice introduction, both to you and Jacopo, and for this excellent summary of our work on the survey.
Thank you again, Richard, for your commitment and for your engagement supporting Africa Economic Zones organization. And I know that yourself and your team, without naming Iman, Aslan, and Farah from AEZO, were working hardly to make this happen.
Yes, certainly. We're very happy with the project on which we're collaborating with our two organizations, and it's going to be an important part of the longer-term project we have in creating a practitioner's guide or handbook for SEZ programs, and all in the context of the collaboration between AEZO and UNCTAD.
Excellent. Please go ahead with the conclusions. We have some SEZ managers that are quite excited to hear the outcome of this survey.
Great, thank you very much. I wonder if colleagues can put up the presentation material so I can talk through that. Thank you very much. If you could kindly go to the slide with the key messages right away. Why wait? Let's go straight to the conclusions. As Ahmed already introduced, the survey that we carried out with SEZs and SEZ authorities across the continent covered a lot of topics. Of course, in this short time that we have today, we have to focus on a few things. So let me just lift out 3 areas, but of course the overall survey will be shared with AEZO members, and so you will see all of the results that you have of the survey that you have provided us with the answers. The overall title of today's conference, right? So zones can make also, it's not just the opportunities that the CFTA will provide us with, but it is also that SEZs can provide a big contribution to economic integration in Africa by promoting intra-regional trade and investment. So I really like the title that we have for today's meeting, right? It's not, to paraphrase, it's not just asking what the CFTA can do for us, but it is also about what we can do for the CFTA, right? Because that economic integration ultimately is really important for the long-term sustainability of zones, and that's the third point I'll lift out of the findings of the survey today. So let's move to the first point and just elaborate a little bit, right? So challenges and opportunities. So on the side of opportunities, you see a few points there that have been lifted out by the survey respondents that we heard about earlier today from some of the introductory speakers, right? So the objective to enhance industrial diversification and to attract new investment. Very interesting there that the answer that we will attract new investment from outside of Africa is actually, that expectation is even slightly higher than the intra-African investment expectations. And that shows how important the creation of a much bigger regional market is considered to be for investment promotion, right? We had our World Investment Report, UNCTAD's World Investment Report this year, which looks at the future of international production over the coming 10 years. And our expectation that that investment and investment promotion in regional value chains will become much more important is also shared here by respondents to the survey. Very important point there. The second point raised is enhancing bilateral collaboration among African SEZs, and I think that's a real shoe-in for AEZO, and really shows the importance of a good regional organization that can stimulate cooperation and knowledge sharing among the SEZs on the continent. Important to highlight some of the challenges on the right-hand side there, and two of the ones that are mentioned there, these are just the top three. The heterogeneity of market regulations and market characteristics. That's clearly an issue in practically all FTAs, but especially so in Africa. Some of the earlier speakers, including our senior director of UNCTAD, Mr. James Sahn, already mentioned the different regulations present in the various what we call sub-regional FTAs. So in COMESA and EAC and SADC, so they all have different perspectives on SEZs, and that's considered to be among some of the challenges to be resolved. Another one ranked high at the top there surprised me a little bit, to be honest, so that the pressure on labor and environmental standards, but I think it is very much driven by the expectation that regional integration will also trigger increasing regional competition among SEZs. So it's not just about collaboration, there's also a degree of competition we have to keep in mind. Maybe the word co-opetition is apt here. And of course, that is triggering a fear by some of the survey respondents that there may be some downward pressure on labor and environmental standards. I will come back to this at the end of my quick presentation. Moving on to the next page. This is basically the expected impact of the different policy areas discussed in the CFTA. And a lot of positivity expected there from trade facilitation. Investment ranks extremely high, indicating the importance of the investment chapter to be defined. Customs cooperation and trade in services, all in items that are expected to have a highly, that are very important for SEZs for the promotion of trade. On the right-hand side, a couple of areas where survey respondents have mixed feelings, basically, about the impact that CFTA might have. And they relate very much to non-tariff barriers and technical barriers to trade. And that these are some of the areas that are covered in part by CFTA, but there is also among those a number of informal barriers that any FTA would have difficulty in handling effectively. Moving on from here, next slide, please. It shows here as well, so the barriers that impact regional exports, and let's not forget, a key objective of the CFTA is promoting intra-regional exports. So we're talking about that today. And the number one barrier that is being listed here by SEZ respondents is informal barriers. And then we have to, of course, think about what are the elements of the CFTA that are most effective in mitigating some of these informal barriers. And here we're talking about, well, some of the trade facilitation measures, but also some of the measures related to transparency, administrative transparency, and administrative information provision, which have the benefit of formalizing processes and of reducing the possibility for informal barriers to persist. There will be a session later today, one of the expert sessions towards the end of the day, where another colleague from UNCTAD, Mr. Frank Rosell, who is the coordinator of the business and investment facilitation section in UNCTAD, will present the information portals and single windows that we as UNCTAD help countries and SEZs implement. And we will see how they can support also the reduction of informal barriers. I've lost the presentation in front of me. I'm not sure if that was intentional. Yes, thank you. Let's move on to the next. Here's also some of the barriers that SEZs have indicated as barriers to the attraction of investment, where infrastructure, of course, as often is the case, continues to rank as number one. Here, I think there's an important point that that was also mentioned earlier today in a presentation about how investment in infrastructure around zones is becoming increasingly important for the future success of zones, but that this importance needs to be balanced with what we call in UNCTAD the frugal approach, right? There is a huge risk of over-investing in initial infrastructure development for zones, which would then have difficulty in recouping investment if the attraction of new companies, new operators in the zone is going too slow in the early startup phases of zones. So this is an important point here. Another interesting one is a lack of information opportunities. I think what the respondents to our survey mean here is that sometimes the investment opportunities in the zones are marketed better even outside Africa than they are marketed within the African continent to investors across the continent. And I think maybe here's a task for AEZO to see how we can improve the marketing of investment opportunities continent-wide. Next slide, please. Well, this is the conclusion of this section, right? So the impact of CFTA for zones and zone programs overall expected to have a very positive impact with an increase in intra-regional exports bigger than the increase in exports outside the zone. Now that's highly necessary. Let me just, we didn't have time to include a lot of background and backdrop on data for investment and trade in this presentation, but just to highlight a few numbers that I think are important in the context. When we talk about the conference today is about how SEZs can promote intra-regional investment. Let's consider intra-regional trade and investment. Let's consider that when we look at trade, the growth of exports overall from Africa over the last 5 years or so is around 5% annually. Let's not talk about this year, of course, with the COVID-19 impact, but up until this year. But the growth of intra-regional trade in Africa is only about 1.5%, so lower than the growth of exports outside the zone. So I think there's a real task here for the CFTA to change that picture. And the answer to this question that you see on the slide here is really to try and change that picture and to see that we can grow intra-regional trade relative to exports outside the continent. The same goes a little bit for investment, right? I mean, we know that Africa as a continent accounts for only about 3% of global foreign direct investment inflows. And intra-regional investment in Africa is really only about 10%. It's very, very low. If we look at some other regions in the world, like we earlier saw comparisons with ASEAN, we saw comparisons with the EU. Intra-regional trade and investment is, of course, much higher, including in the recently signed RCEP zone, which has really yet to start, of course, because it's not yet to be ratified. It was only signed 2 weeks ago, but already there, the degree of integration on trade and investment is much higher. So there's a big job to do. Moving on to the next section, and I'll try and go rapidly through the remainder. So the contribution that zones can make. So this is what we can do for CFTA, what we can do for integration in Africa, right? So here a first picture on the current and expected importance of different sectors, of different industries in the trade picture in Africa, right? So we see, of course, agriculture and food, very important currently in SEZs. We heard the example earlier from the president of the African Development Bank, who was mentioning the development of special agricultural processing zones. This is clearly a sector, a commodity sector, which in Africa is extremely important and is expected to become even more important post CFTA implementation. And that's right. I mean, it is, however, important to consider that the classical or original conception of free zones, of what used to be called export processing zones in particular, was really about different sectors, right? It was about zones that need to import components to be assembled for re-export, right? So there was a lot of that going on. And so, you know, agriculture and food are important now, and they will become even more important, but they require a type of special economic zone that is slightly different from the original conception. Instead, what we see here is that resource-based light manufacturing, automotive, textiles, other manufacturing, electronics, the typical GVC intensive, global value chain intensive industries are expected to be particularly to benefit in particular from CFTA. So the expectation on the part of the survey respondents, on the part of SEZs, is that there will be growth in the GVC intensive nature there. So we need to balance the real opportunity presented earlier on agro-processing with the opportunity to further develop regional value chains in value chain intensive industries. Next slide, please. There was a payoff underneath that last slide that I forgot to mention, right? And I think we have it here as well. It's important. If we look at investment promotion to support GVC growth, to support regional value chain growth, and if we look at the changes in the targets for investment promotion post CFTA, and we see that on this slide, it's really important for SEZs to work closely with investment promotion agencies, right? So whenever there is a big strategic change in targets in terms of source countries and targets in terms of industries, it's important to coordinate with investment promotion authorities. And in that context, we have a discussion over the next few days on the 7th and 8th of December in UNCTAD, the Global Investment Promotion Conference, to which we have also invited all SEZ stakeholders to discuss exactly that, the degree of coordination between SEZs and investment promotion agencies. And I know Ahmed Benes is speaking at this conference as well. Just to highlight some of the points from this slide, you see there what are currently the most important source countries for investment in zones, and what do we expect to be the most important source countries post CFTA implementation. And what you see there is that especially the emerging markets and the regional markets are expected to become more important sources of investment. Moving on to the next slide. So here's a similar slide as we saw earlier on trade. So we do expect increased investment, increased intra-regional investment, right? The whole point of CFTA is, of course, to grow intra-regional trade and investment. But very interestingly, as I mentioned already earlier, the expectation for growth also from outside the market is important, because it's not just about promoting regional value chains, but it's also about creating a much bigger domestic market for investment promotion from outside the zone. Next. And here is, again, what are some of the industries that will be important for investment promotion? And again, here, a very similar picture as what I discussed earlier. So agro-processing will become the key industry for investment promotion, and it is simply a very important sector in Africa. And I'm glad to see this, and I was very happy to hear the opportunity that our colleague from the African Development Bank presented. And it really comes out of what SEZ stakeholders responded to our survey. And again, there you see all of the other sectors that are considered to become very important for investment promotion are, again, those GVC intensive industries, right? So the lowering of trade costs, the removal of obstacles to investment will especially benefit those type of industries that need regional cross-border interaction, right? So the resource-based light manufacturing, textiles, electronics, these are all the sectors that the ASEAN SEZs, which often function as examples for how SEZs in Africa would like to develop, they are here considered to be the main beneficiaries of the CFTA. Moving on. And it brings me, I think, to the last part of this very quick presentation of survey results. And really, it is the overall conclusion, and because we've talked about what the CFTA can do for us, we've talked about how SEZs are going to be important to support CFTA implementation, to support regional integration, to support the promotion of intra-regional trade and investment. But I would like to say that this intra-regional trade and investment promotion is going to be of vital importance for the long-term sustainability of zone programs in Africa. Because when we look at the current occupancy levels in the zones, you see that there is still a very sizable chunk of the current zones that have a lot of spare capacity. Now, in some cases, of course, that's because zone programs are new, right? And they're still in the startup phase. But in some cases, that also relates to zones that have been established already for quite a while and that simply haven't yet seen the fast growth in investment attraction that we would have liked to see. I think Mr. James Zahn earlier mentioned this as well in his introductory remarks. There's a high degree of variation among zone performance in Africa, and there's a lot to be done to make sure that the zone capacity is being filled further in order to recoup investments in zones. This is why I mentioned earlier our stressing of the frugal approach, our emphasis on what we call, we have called it the profit and loss statement for sustainable zone development. We developed this tool in the World Investment Report 2019 to make sure that zones really keep track of the fiscal and economic sustainability of zones. So this chart really brings it out. And the same goes for export performance. I mentioned earlier a few figures on export and FDI performance in Africa, and about the fact that intra-regional exports and FDI really have room for growth. If we look at the moment at what is the situation for growth of trade and investment between countries with and countries without SEZs, at this moment, we don't see much of a difference. Now, I know that I'm throwing a little bit of a challenge to you on the table here. Please take it in good spirit. I am completely with AEZO, and UNCTAD is very supportive. We want to support programs that help SEZs make a bigger contribution to intra-regional trade and investment promotion. Now, while doing that, I mentioned earlier the fear, and I go to the next slide, the fear on some of the survey respondents that the increased competition among zones might lead to downward pressure on social and environmental standards. And here we have actually the opposite, right? I'm quite encouraged by these numbers that there are quite a good percentage of zones that provide their investors inside the zones with services and facilities that really support high standards of environmental performance. We have the same question in the survey on social services and facilities. We get similar numbers, so there is already quite a goodly number of zones that provide social and environmental services. And here, just to highlight for you, and it was mentioned earlier, so I will not go too deep on it, the SDG model zone that we developed in the World Investment Report can be a guide for this, right? So we believe that for the long-term sustainability of zones, we need to work on supporting regional trade and investment promotion to increase to improve the use of capacity in the zones, but at the same time, we need to make sure that those zones perform at the highest levels of environmental, social, and government standards, that they have positive spillovers and inclusive effects on the surrounding economy, and that they attract investment in what we call SDG relevant activities and provide investors really with the services and facilities they need to have a high standard of environmental performance, such as you see here, the inspection services, the waste management facilities, the renewable energy installations, recycling services, etc. These are all very important aspects, and there is already a very good percentage here. There is still room for growth. With that reference to our SDG model zone, I would like to wrap up this presentation, but I'm very open to questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Very insightful numbers. I think that the survey really lived up to expectations. A few questions. We have a couple of questions from the audience. I got a couple of questions. I think that one point that you touched upon is very low level at the moment of intra-African, or at least like intra-ACTFA investment compared to other trade blocks. Actually, we compiled a few stats a few weeks ago, and let me just like throw in a number. The area, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement has got a consumer base, a population base of 1.2 billion, and attracts less generates less intra-regional investment than the Gulf country, the GCC area, where there are like 57 million people. So it's really incredible the kind of like the scope and the magnitude of the investment gap there. And let me also connect this to the fact that your survey highlights that there is still a kind of like a miscommunication between zones and investment promotion agencies, and this is also key for them to connect better to attract investment. So my question for you, and I encourage you to be concise so that we can have other questions. Do you expect intra-regional investment to go up after the introduction of this trade area? And what can single zones actually do to be more appealing to to investors in their regional peers?
Yeah, I think we have to put it into context a little bit. Of course, total outward investment, outward FDI from African multinationals, from African investors is quite low in general, right? I mean, this is a continent with the lowest levels of GDP per capita and very relatively little resources available for investment. So it is not surprising that if overall investment is low, that intra-regional investment will be low too, right? Now, do we expect this to grow? That's a function of two things. One is it will grow with overall investment. So with a growing middle class, with a growing availability of resources available for outward investment, that intra-regional part will grow too. The second thing that is important is, of course, the targeted promotion and facilitation of intra-regional investment and the growth of regional value chains. I do expect that this will grow, so that's the answer to your question. And it will grow not just because of the CFTA, which is going to be a core pillar of making this grow. So I do see that this is going to be very important. But there are some general trends in international production today that also supports the hypothesis of growing intra-regional trade and investment. The trends that we see in international production, which basically means the global operations of multinational enterprises and the trade and investment that they spread around the world. And the trend for the coming years will be one of resilience-seeking investment, will be one of more regional international production networks rather than global international production networks, and will be one that of diversification, and diversification that includes their diversification away from the very strong dependence on the manufacturing base in Asia towards other regions in the world. So I can see an opportunity there, driven both by CFTA and by general trends in global international production.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Richard. Let me also bring in on this Ahmed, if Ahmed is still there on the line. Well, do you want to share also your own perspective on the regionalization of global value chains, do you see already early signs of the possible development of regional value chains, or else still you would expect this to happen in the foreseeable future?
Yes, definitely. I think that today it should not be a wish anymore. It should become a will. And we are all entitled, I'm talking on behalf of the SEZ community, to foster regional integrations and also to promote intra-African investment, intra-African trade. And those kind of initiatives should definitely grow through the CFTA itself and all the opportunities that would offer and that we should seize. But I think that investors also would be more attracted with a larger market, with let's say more sourcing opportunities. But at the end of the day, which is important to all of us, is to develop the complementarity between the different special economic zones and the different countries. And this is definitely one of the main objectives that we should work on. And this complementarity in the value chain, by supporting each other when a country or an SEZ should fit to the investors' needs and should bring should bring certain key fundamentals to attract a certain kind of investors, and in complement other SEZ would bring an added value. This would definitely be the main objective of the CFTA itself, and would then definitely help to grow our economy and enhance regional integration within the continent.
That's fantastic. Okay, guys, I think that we got time just for a very last question. And the question comes from Ms. Shiraz Benseman, and she asks, what are the investments or what are the efforts that need to be made by African countries to improve their logistics in Africa, within the continent, and foster cooperation and trade on the continent? So maybe Richard, you want to go first?
Sure. I mean, there's a long list here, I think, of things that that can be done both at the policy level by policymakers, and that can be done at SEZ program level and at individual SEZ level, right? One of the, or several of the slides I presented listed some of the barriers to intra-regional trade and intra-regional investment that SEZs at this moment themselves highlight, right? And so addressing these would be, first on my priority list, right? Now, some of that will require resources to invest in infrastructure. Some of that, and there, of course, our colleagues, we had them earlier, of the multilateral development banks will be of huge assistance. But I think there is also a very important opportunity there to create a better climate for the attraction of private investment in such infrastructure development. If we look at the trends now, and also specifically at the trend this year with the COVID-19 impact, we registered about a 50% decline in FDI around the world this year because of COVID-19. But the decline in project finance in infrastructure and in greenfield investment in utilities and other infrastructure industry is much, much lower, right? And there is a much stronger trend and a much stronger drive also from a resilience perspective to get investment in that infrastructure that we need. So that's infrastructure, but some of the other barriers mentioned there are also important. Some of them are regulatory, and that's difficult. Policymakers need to go through a long process to reform. But some of them are things that can be changed simply by changing the way we do things rather than changing the laws, right? So some of the administrative barriers that are being highlighted by the survey respondents, such as informal barriers and some of the barriers at the border, are things that don't necessarily need to be addressed by changes in laws. When we implement what we call e-regulations and e-registration, which is some of the the facilitation, investment and business facilitation projects that we carry out across the continent, what we often see is that things can be changed within the boundaries of the existing laws and regulations. So there's not always a need to make complex reforms that need to go through Parliament, but sometimes institutions, government institutions, can change and make things easier for investors and business and traders simply by changing the way they do things.
Fantastic. Thank you, Richard. Ahmed, there at TangerMed, you have put up a very impressive logistics platform. What can be some lessons that can be shared for all best practices for other zones on the continent?
I think that TangerMed project is could be a very good example, but it's not the only one that exists in the continent. The fact that it's a fully integrated platform where we connect the development of special economic zones with the development of the logistics through the development of the port complex and also the logistic corridors demonstrated that this is definitely one of the best example to follow. Logistic is key anyway. Logistic is key to develop trade, to enhance the performance of the special economic zones, to simply enhance the development of the economic context. I mean, within the continent. But when talking about logistic, it's not only a matter of upgrading the infrastructure. We agree on that, because we must connect the economic zones with its ecosystem, with its environments, and we definitely need the right infrastructure, the infrastructure setup. But when talking about trade facilitations or offering all the, let's say, the fundamentals for the development of a good logistic performance, there it comes, the use of the technology and digitizations, trade facilitations by, let's say, enhancing the process and offering a good quality services to the industrialists and to the investors. And this is definitely the path that some special economic zones already undertook, and this is definitely the right way to develop and to enhance the performance of the special economic zones at a wider level.
Okay, guys, I think that we really have to wrap up. From my own perspective, I think that it was, again, very insightful to see that there is a scope for zones to improve also the way they communicate their investment opportunities to the outer world. And if I may share our own experience, as I mentioned at the very beginning, every year we organize these free zones awards, where we kind of like get entries and submissions from free zones all over the world, and we generally get about like 150 entries every year. And so far African zones are still a sort of like a minority in these entries. Definitely is not a very representative statistical subset, and we will really love to increase the number of those entries. And Ahmed and AEZO were very helpful in recently to help us also get more interest and get more details about African zones. So on this particular note, I guess, again, also this way, the way zones will communicate to the market, the opportunities that they can offer to investors will be one of the key factors determining whether or not that spare capacity will be filled up in the years to come, and in this market that no matter what remains challenging, but also with the African continental free trade bloc opens up very many opportunities for regional trade and investment. So I guess it's really all from me. Thank you again, Richard Baldwin from UNCTAD, Ahmed Benis from AEZO. I guess you will be still busy throughout the day, and I pass it back to you.
Thank you very much, Jacobo. I will not make any more promotion about the excellent job that you are doing at the FDI magazine or the Financial Times. But we promise that for 2021 we will develop together a dedicated index for the African economic zones, and this is going to be a joint initiative that we will run on together, and we will get also some support from the UNCTAD. Since Richard is with us, I will definitely ask for his help and his support. Thank you so much.
Very much looking forward to it.
Take care. Bye-bye.